The finest screen actor of the 20th century, Marlon Brando revolutionized Hollywood and took a stand against racism.
Marlon Brando still is the ultimate bad boy. He rode a motorcycle and he rebelled against everything.
But when he died, he was a recluse who left behind a troubled legacy, as well as a dozen children from 5 different relationships.
Fame and fortune seem to be magnifying the existing patterns of unstable relationships, substance abuse, and emotional neglect.
On top of that, he had a handful of dubious advisors, making the battle for Brando's fortune as cutthroat as the characters he portrayed.
So there was really no surprise that the lawsuits started flying after Marlon Brando died.
Brando's a very dark and fascinating figure. He seemed to understand that power has a dark side. I mean, look at the role he played in The Godfather. He made an organized crime figure lovable.
Though Brando was often a slave to the almighty dollar, in the years since his death, his fortune grows, but in the most unusual ways.
Who would have thought gamers who weren't even born when The Godfather came out in 1972 would be interested in playing a digital Don Corleone?
There were multiple companies that tried to sell products under Brando's name, which prompted the estate to sue these various companies.
The fame, the fortune, the legacy of Marlon Brando. Marlon Brando introduced the world to a raw and realistic style of acting, breaking the conservative post-war mold and changing the face of Hollywood forever.
I sort of regarded acting as a means of making a living. Since I don't do anything else well, I might as well put all my energies into being as good an actor as I can.
Generations later, a countless number of Hollywood's greatest actors model themselves on his style.
When it comes to acting, it's pretty clear. Brando is the marker. There's BB before Brando and AB after Brando. In between, not much else.
Through his fame, Brando put a spotlight on what he considered unacceptable treatment of Native Americans and African Americans, making himself a target of the FBI. But Brando didn't care. He did whatever he wanted and earned big money along the way. Even after his death in 2004, Marlon Brando's rebellious image lives on, and it's still making millions. But fame and fortune weren't his only goals. He also wanted to give a voice to the struggles of those who didn't have his podium. This is the story of all that he left behind. One of the most exciting American actors to light up the screen, Marlon Brando was born on April 3, 1924, in Omaha, Nebraska. His father, Marlon Brando Sr., a successful traveling salesman, gives his only son his name, but little else. An abusive alcoholic who seems barely interested in young Brando, he often tells his son he'll never amount to anything. Brando's mother, Dorothy, also seems to choose getting drunk over caring for Marlon or his 2 older sisters, Jocelyn and Frances. In their early years, the children are mainly raised by the family maid, Ermie. When Brando is 7, Ermie leaves to get married. He will later say that this instilled in him a sense of abandonment. Brando craves his mother's attention, learning to imitate the sounds of farm animals and voices of neighbors to waken her from drunken stupors. He quickly learns acting is the only way to hold his mother's gaze.
Marlon, having 2 alcoholic parents, left him with a lot of unmet needs. And he actually has a lot of the characteristics of most children of alcoholic parents. Constant need for approval, hyper-responsibility or hyper-irresponsibility, also very harshly self-critical. That characterizes a lot of his qualities.
Hungry for attention, young Brando is a troublemaker at Libertyville High. His final act of mischief, putting hydrosulfate into the vents so the classrooms smell of rotten eggs, gets him expelled and sent to military school. But before he goes, Brando comes to the rescue of a skinny kid being bullied. This boy will go on to become acclaimed comedian and character actor Wally Cox, Brando's best friend for life. At military school, Brando excels at theater, starring in his first play. But it doesn't take long before he's kicked out of school yet again. So he gets a construction job, earning $35 a week. He soon follows his sisters to New York City, where Frances has gone to study art and Jocelyn to become an actress. Brando heads to the actor's studio on Saturday mornings to learn from Elia Kazan. The school's bevy of beautiful actresses are also a draw. He enjoys acting because when he performs, Brando hears good things about himself. He also develops his own subtle style of performance.
In the 40s, acting was all about over-emoting, mugging it, hitting you over the head with the emotion. Now, Brando, on the other hand, was all self-contained, quiet, dignified, amazing.
Brando debuts his style on Broadway in 1944 in the play I Remember Mama, and talent scouts from the major film studios take notice. He's asked to screen test, but refuses. He has no interest in the restrictive 7-year contracts. Instead, Brando spends 3 years honing his craft on stage, and in 1946 is voted Broadway's most promising actor. The following year, Brando learns that Tennessee Williams' play A Streetcar Named Desire is about to hit Broadway. Kazan wants him for the role of Stanley Kowalski, but Brando must be approved by Williams himself. Brando hitchhikes to Williams' Massachusetts summer home to convince the playwright. The moment Williams hears him read the part, he knows he's looking at Stanley Kowalski.
Okay, just look at that sneer, right? When Brando walked out on stage, all eyes from the audience were glued on him. With his tight jeans and his sweaty t-shirt, he was like a caged animal in heat. His Stanley Kowalski is crude, violent, and he's like nothing any audience had ever seen before. But the crowd responded with a 30-minute standing ovation.
Brando is an overwhelming success. Although he has avoided Hollywood for years, in 1950, he's offered $50,000 to play a bitter, paraplegic veteran in The Man. Brando finds he can't say no. His movie career is born.
Brando didn't like Hollywood or what it stood for, but he was more than happy to cash in on it. The $50,000 paycheck that he received would be equivalent to $500,000 today.
But some critics aren't sure of his subtle acting style.
So the critics, they just slagged him off as a mumbler and virtually an animal. But those critics, they missed the deep sensitivity that he portrayed playing a paraplegic in The Men.
Brando had met actor Sam Gilman earlier in New York, and they had hit it off. The Men is the first of several films they'll make together, and Gilman goes on to star in numerous television series. Brando and Gilman's friendship is solidified for life. In Hollywood, Brando's movie career quickly takes off. He stars in 6 more films, including Julius Caesar. The best of these being the screen adaptation of A Streetcar Named Desire, for which he earns his first Oscar nod and $75,000. Rolling in money, Brando proves to his father he's made something of himself by buying his parents a farm in Illinois. But the rest of the world needs no proof that Brando's arrived, as he's quickly declared a sex symbol. Brando longs for actress Jackie Collins, but he's in his late 20s, and she's just 15.
As a matter of biology, a 15-year-old can consent. As a matter of law, they're deemed incapable. And an incapable person cannot consent to sexual contact. That's what's known as statutory rape. Under most state laws at the current time, that is mandatory prison time. So Marlon may have caught a break for succumbing to that siren song at a time when it was a little less difficult in terms of legal consequences than it is now.
But Brando has never cared much for rules. In 1953, he becomes a symbol of rebellion and an icon to the burgeoning rock and roll generation by playing biker gang leader Johnny Strabler in The Wild One. For the role, Brando rides his own Triumph Thunderbird 6T and earns $100,000. The Wild One is a cinematic classic, and sales of blue jeans and leather jackets skyrocket shortly after its release. But of all his early films, it's 1954's On the Waterfront that features Brando's most legendary performance. A crime drama that earns him another $100,000 and his first Oscar, while his I Could Have Been a Contender speech remains one of the most famous scenes in motion picture history. With an Oscar under his belt, countless adoring fans, and more money than he ever imagined, Marlon Brando is living the high life. Until August 16th, 1954, when his mother dies.
The death of a parent is a huge loss, but for Marlon, it was complicated by the type of relationship he had with his mother, where she was neglectful, she was an alcoholic, she didn't really provide for his basic needs. So On one hand, he was probably really sad, and on the other hand, he would never have that resolution.
Brando becomes increasingly difficult to work with, insisting on using cue cards rather than memorizing his lines. He says it brings spontaneity and realism to his performance. Directors find it difficult to film around his cards on set. By the time he stars as Napoleon Bonaparte in Désirée, he decides to put a little effort into his performance. Brando dismisses the entire movie as superficial and dismal. Nonetheless, Désirée grosses over $9 million at the box office. Brando does put effort into wooing co-star Rita Moreno. After meeting on the set of Désirée, they begin an 8-year-long affair. The following year, he meets Indian actress Anna Kashfi. They too become lovers. And soon Brando adds a third, beginning a relationship with Marilyn Monroe that lasts until her death.
Brando said that he always had a lot of women in his life as an emotional insurance policy. That speaks to his deep, deep fear of abandonment, being alone, and not being taken care of.
After just 5 years in Hollywood, iconic rebel Marlon Brando is at the top of his game. Not only is he considered a sex symbol and dating numerous women, but he's also created a new performance standard that actors, including Brando himself, will be hard-pressed to maintain. One of the greatest movie actors of all time and a quintessential American sex symbol, Marlon Brando has won an Oscar and a legion of fans. By the mid-50s, Brando's not only bringing in the ladies, he's also bringing in the bucks. He's paid $200,000 for a role in the musical Guys and Dolls, but Brando seems to be restless.
But he's fed up with the whole studio regime and the questionable roles he's been getting, and he took his fortune and he started his own company, Pennebaker.
Named after his late mother, the company aims to develop films of value to society. One of the first is 1957's Sayonara, addressing issues of interracial relationships. For his role as U.S. Air Force officer Ace Groover, Brando pays himself $300,000. Brando appoints his father to run his company. Not because he has financial skill, but because after decades of being daunted by his abusive dad, employing him gives Brando the upper hand.
But Brando Sr., he repays the favor by losing all his son's money.
Because Brando's father lost all of his money, he had to do the very thing he'd been trying so hard to avoid, and that is sign a large picture deal for more movies with companies he didn't want to have to be beholden to.
Broke, Brando discovers he'll soon have another mouth to feed. His lover Kashfi is pregnant. Fortunately, he wins the part of a Nazi officer in the 1958 film The Young Lions. It would be Brando's last hit film for more than 10 years. Brando spends big on a wedding for he and Kashfi. But just months after their son Christian is born, he's spending again on a divorce. That same year, Brando stars in The Fugitive Kind. It's a failure at the box office, but Brando isn't concerned. For his role, he makes history as the first actor to be paid $1 million. Brando buys a mansion on Hollywood's famed Mulholland Drive and spends thousands on books, filling the place with up to 4,000 of them. He also takes a second bride, Mexican-American actress Movida Castaneda. Together, they extend his family with Brando's second son, Miko, in 1961. Castaneda is apparently wary of staff stealing food and so installs a lock on the refrigerator. Until one day, she finds the lock broken and teeth marks on a round of cheese. The teeth marks are Brando's. She's married to a binge eater.
And Castaneda's not the only one noticing. On his next film, One-Eyed Jacks, the costume department, they're constantly altering his clothes because, well, he's been feasting on, gallons of ice cream, 2 quarts of milk a day, a dozen eggs. I mean, the guy's eating like there's no tomorrow.
Binge eating is similar to substance abuse. It's a way to manage emotions, and it's a relationship substitute. It seems he was going to food for comfort, for nurturing, because he didn't really learn how to get his needs met in a healthy relationship.
Brando spends little time as a father. Instead, he throws himself into his work, opting to go behind the camera to direct the picture One-Eyed Jacks. As a director, Brando is a bust. He casts the film with friends, including actors Sam Gilman, and burns through 10 times the usual amount of film stock. As the budget balloons from $1.8 to $6 million, the movie takes so long to edit, the studio removes him from the film. But One-Eyed Jacks has nothing on his next movie, Mutiny on the Bounty. 2 directors quit. The shoot goes wildly over schedule, and the film almost bankrupts the studio. Part of the extra expense is due to Brando's binge eating. He often orders 5-course meals from room service and splits more than 50 pairs of pants, requiring stretch fabric to be sewn into his costume. Even so, Brando takes home $1.2 million for the film. When he isn't overindulging in food, Brando continues to overindulge in women. His eye wanders to his 20-year-old Polynesian co-star, Tarita Tarapea. He divorces his second wife and on August 10, 1962, marries Tarapea. The following year, his third child, Simon, is born. But rather than spend time with his new family, Brando heads to New York. Eventually, he returns to live with his new family in Tahiti and stars in a long string of flops, annoying directors and producers with his idiosyncrasies and developing a reputation as box office poison.
So Brando's a sellout now, right? Instead of going back to the stage, to recharge his batteries, he immerses himself in a wasteland of bad Hollywood movies.
But in the 60s, Brando has bigger issues on his mind than Hollywood. On August 28, 1963, he participates in the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom, the largest civil rights demonstration ever in the nation's capital. As one of the first white actors to be part of the civil rights movement, Brando also puts his money where his mouth is and is rumored to contribute thousands to the NAACP. And his activism doesn't end there. He becomes a passionate advocate for Native American treaty rights and is thrown in jail for doing so.
Marlon Brando is sort of like a dark star in American political culture. He was sort of a rebel without a cause before we knew we were looking for a cause. And he adopted many along the way, including the rights of Native Americans. So in Puget Sound, for example, by way of treaty, Native Americans reserved the right to catch fish. The Indians complained that these weren't being honored, and Marlon and others turned up to catch fish. In the end, those rights were vindicated, and the United States Supreme Court upheld a law that permits them to take some fish and that honors the treaty that we'd entered into many years ago.
Brando's activism is not taken lightly. The FBI pay him numerous visits and tap his phone. It also hurts his bankability, as segregated cinemas in the South refuse to play his films.
But Brando doesn't care. Like he said in The Wild One, nobody tells me what to do.
In 1966, he has his 4th child, Rebecca, not with Tarapea, but with his ex-wife, Castaneda. The following year, he has Stephen and Michael, and in 1968, Dylan, and then Angelique, all 4 the products of mysterious affairs.
Marlon seems to have an insatiable sexual appetite, and what that's really about is trying to get his deeper attachment needs met, and it's also puffing up his ego because inside he's still this little needy boy.
Though unemployed and with another 5 mouths to feed, Brando buys a 12-island atoll in Tahiti for almost $300,000 and extends his family once again in 1970 when Tarapea has his 9th child, daughter Cheyenne. Brando spends further on his family by way of a protracted custody battle for his first son, Christian. The case almost bankrupts Brando, but by the time Christian is 13, he's reunited with his father in Tahiti. The following year, Brando finally gets a call from Hollywood. Francis Ford Coppola wants him for The Godfather.
Coppola still believes that Brando is one of the finest actors in the world. Now, add to this that Mario Puzo, he had Brando in mind when he was writing the role in The Godfather. Who better to play the Don than Marlon Brando?
But Paramount isn't so keen. Considering Brando's series of box office failures, they agree to hire him under 3 conditions. Brando accepts a meager $50,000 salary, he takes financial responsibility for production delays caused by his behavior, and he must do a screen test.
On top of his $50,000, he receives 1% of the gross on a sliding scale. 1% for each 10 million and 5% for everything over 60 million.
Brando plays ball, and it pays off. The film and its sequels are a blockbuster success, earning close to $400 million worldwide. But while Brando reaps in the accolades, he isn't swimming in the cash. After 3 years of not working, he's financially desperate, so he sells his profit share back to the studio for $100,000. That $100,000 costs him $11 million. And that's not the only thing he's lost. In 1972, Brando's 10-year marriage to Tarapeya ends. Not wanting to leave Christian in Tahiti with a woman who's no longer his stepmother, Brando gives his son to longtime confidant Joanne Corrales. The next year, Brando's closest friend, Wally Cox, dies. Devastated, he fights his widow for the ashes and wins. For the rest of his life, Brando keeps his friend's remains with him, sometimes having dinner and conversations with his ashes.
And you have to wonder if Brando and Wally were more than just friends. Brando does admit to some homosexual experiences.
That same year, Brando wins an Oscar for The Godfather and makes history when he sends a Native American activist to refuse the award on his behalf, protesting Hollywood's treatment of American Indians. And Brando doesn't stop there. The following year, he stages a press conference where he gives 40 acres of his family farm and his LA home back to the natives. Each property is valued in excess of $100,000. But his protests aren't always peaceful. On June 12, 1973, Brando breaks the jaw of a paparazzo who's following him. The fit of anger costs him $40,000.
Back in the 60s, that was a considerable sum. I don't know what the equivalent value would be today, perhaps $150,000, $200,000. Brando could afford it. I don't think it did anything to tarnish his legacy. If anything, what it said is don't mess with Marlon, and he was prepared to pay the consequence.
The newly returned King of Hollywood, Marlon Brando, has received the highest accolade for an actor, twice. But he's not having anything to do with the prestige coming from Hollywood. How much more will Marlon Brando's rebellion continue to cost him? Legendary cultural icon Marlon Brando has refused an Oscar after spending a decade not working. Focused instead on political protest, and in doing so, has ruffled feathers all over Hollywood. But in 1976, he's back on the big screen in The Missouri Breaks. On set, he indulges in strange behavior, including giving a bizarre performance, changing his accent multiple times throughout the film.
Okay, the movie, it's a critical bomb. But Brando, he laughed last on that one. He walked away with about $1 million.
But he's not smiling 2 years later in 1978 when he works on Superman. Brando was paid $3.7 million and promised 11.3% of the profits, but he never sees his share of the take. So Brando sues to the tune of $50 million, and after a protracted battle is awarded an estimated $10 million. Brando is more fortunate on his next big film, when it's estimated he's paid $9 million for 5 scenes in Apocalypse Now, and receives another Oscar nod. With his finances back in the black, Brando decides to share his wealth, adopting his assistant's daughter Petra and ex-wife Tarapeya's daughter Maimiti and niece Raitua.
Brando keeps adding children to his life because he can financially take care of them. The problem is he's emotionally absent, just like his parents were for him. It may be that he looked to numbers of children as a way to prop up his ego, just like money in a bank account or success or fame.
But his finances and life take a number of hits, starting in 1983, when a hurricane tears through Tahiti, destroying many buildings on his atoll. Brando pours his earnings into rebuilding his island home. A few years later, his good friend, actor Sam Gilman, dies. And tragedy strikes a third time with the mysterious and sudden death of his 7th child, Dylan. Devastated, Brando turns to his trusty vices, women and food. His girth grows to legendary proportions as he reportedly polishes off boxes of cinnamon buns and chocolate cookies with quarts of milk. But Brando catches the eye of his Guatemalan housekeeper, Maria Cristina Ruiz. The two begin an affair, And on May 13, 1989, his 10th child, Nina, is born.
Fame and fortune seem to be magnifying the existing patterns of unstable relationships, substance abuse, and emotional neglect. I don't think they're causing it. I think they're just magnifying it.
Again, Brando flees fatherhood, throwing himself into his work. In the 1989 film A Dry White Season, he gives an Oscar-worthy performance as a South African attorney.
Due to the film's anti-apartheid message, Brando waived his usual fee and he worked for Union Scale. But he still insisted that MGM, the studio, they donate to anti-apartheid causes.
While he cares for the struggles of the oppressed across the world, his children are all but forgotten, and no one feels this more than Cheyenne. In 1989, while her father films The Freshman, a troubled Cheyenne calls him wanting to visit. Brando refuses, and Cheyenne is devastated. Believed to have been driving erratically, she crashes her car, causing serious facial injuries. Brando flies her to LA and pays a small fortune for extensive reconstructive surgery, but things will never be the same. Soon after, she becomes pregnant. Brando invites Cheyenne and boyfriend Dag Drolet to live in his Mulholland Drive home to await the birth of his grandchild. But the Brandos don't have a history of playing happy family. And on May 16, 1990, older brother Christian shoots Drolet after learning he's been abusing Cheyenne. Brando pours most of his fortune into his son's criminal defense.
A pivotal witness in this case is Cheyenne. But Cheyenne suddenly is no longer within the reach of California authorities to testify. She's sent back to Tahiti. None of this makes sense to me. I don't know who put Cheyenne on a plane for Tahiti. Odds are Mr. Brando or somebody at his direction did. If that's the case, he effectively or constructively placed her beyond the reach of the law, beyond subpoena power. While she was there, she struggled with depression. She was declared incapable of testifying by a French psychiatrist. Again, that doesn't make much sense. There is something suspicious about it, and the result worked to Christian's benefit. He pled to a lesser form of homicide, manslaughter, received a 10-year sentence, and was released after serving 5. So, did he get away with murder? I don't know. I wasn't there that night.
Christian's legal fees almost bankrupt Brando. So in 1992, he cuts a deal for a cameo. He works 5 days on the film Christopher Columbus, The Discovery, and rakes in $5 million. And he's going to need the money. On top of Christian's legal fees, Brando has 2 more children. Housekeeper Ruiz has sons Miles in 1992 and Timothy in 1994. Brando turns to writing, penning the autobiography Songs My Mother Taught Me.
But the book that he wrote, it really didn't deliver. In fact, he could be credited with creating a new literary genre, the tell-nothing autobiography.
In 1995, a mentally unstable Cheyenne commits suicide. Her son will be raised by his grandmother. Depression hits Brando, and he becomes a recluse, rarely leaving his Hollywood home. Even so, at age 76, he's cast in The Score. Though he battles with the director, the film is a hit, and Brando collects $3 million.
So that would be his last film, but not his last job by a long shot. On September 7th in 2001, Brando's asked a favor. Michael Jackson wants him to introduce him for his 30th anniversary special. There's one catch. Brando insists on $1 million payday.
That same year, Brando ends his 14-year relationship with Maria Cristina Ruiz, former housekeeper and mother of his youngest 3 children. Though he buys her $1 million Sherman Oaks home, she sues him for $100 million in child support and living expenses. Realizing his finances are in trouble, Brando attempts to reclaim $185,000 he'd previously given adopted daughter Petra's mother for her home. He claims it was a loan, but Petra says it was a gift and fights back, slapping him with a lawsuit. The lawsuit won't be settled until just 1 week before his death. And it's not just his finances that are under threat. By now, Brando's health is seriously declining. He has diabetes, and it's causing his eyesight to fail. And then he is diagnosed with liver cancer. So Brando decides to draft a will. Brando names former personal assistant Alice Marchak, who'd known and cared for him for 50 years, and business manager Joanne Corrales, the executors of his will. By 2004, Brando suffers from pulmonary fibrosis. Even so, he doesn't stop working. Electronic Arts Games asks Brando to voice Don Corleone for a Godfather video game they're developing. They pay Brando $800,000 for 1 hour of work. But soon after, his condition worsens, and doctors say he has little time left. Though every day is a battle, on June 18, 2004, Brando somehow summons the energy to call his lawyer and change his will.
There was a lot of controversy surrounding Marlon Brando's estate because a mere 13 days before he died, he allegedly signed a codicil, which is an amendment to his will, and it replaced his longtime executors, a business administrator and his personal assistant, each of which he had known for more than 40 years, with completely new people. And at the time he signed it, he was suffering from a host of physical ailments and, according to some, dementia.
Shortly thereafter, Brando's told the only way to prolong his life is to insert tubes carrying oxygen directly into his lungs. Brando refuses the procedure, and on Wednesday, June 30th, 2004, he takes a turn for the worse. Brando is rushed to the UCLA Medical Center. It's been 60 years since he stepped onto a Broadway stage and changed the game forever. Breaking all the rules, Brando fought relentlessly for the rights of Black and Native Americans. But now, he faces his biggest fight of all, the fight for his life. Eccentric genius and perhaps the greatest actor of our time, Marlon Brando is rushed to hospital. Battling cancer, diabetes, and pulmonary fibrosis, those close to him know there's not long left. The next day, on Thursday, July 1st, 2004, with his sister Jocelyn by his side, Marlon Brando loses the fight for his life and dies of respiratory failure. News of the legendary actor's death devastates Hollywood. Within minutes, fans begin to gather at his star on the Walk of Fame, while Native Americans mourn the loss of one of their most high-profile spokesmen for their struggle. In Hollywood, the rule-breaking Oscar winner leaves an impressive legacy of rebellious loners, from Nicholson to Pacino to Crowe.
And Brando remains the yardstick by which all American actors are still measured. There was only one thing in his home that was even related to his film career. Not an Oscar, not a script, but a framed photo of him in a love scene with Rita Moreno. And she, in that photo, was naked as the day she was born.
On Monday, July 5th, Marlon Brando was cremated during a private funeral in LA, attended only by those close to him. As per his instructions, his ashes are mixed with those of good friends Wally Cox and Sam Gilman. They are scattered partly in Tahiti and partly in Death Valley. A private memorial follows. According to Brando's wishes, there is no public memorial. Throughout his life, Brando spent big on his Tahitian island paradise, his son's criminal defense, and his growing family. Add to this his periods of unemployment, and it's reported he's $20 million in debt.
How can you be so successful, widely recognized as one of the greatest actors of all time, yet wind up nearly $20 million in debt? It just doesn't make sense.
And it doesn't. The reports are wrong. When his will is finally read, it paints a very different picture of the late Marlon Brando. Rather than a destitute, sick man struggling on a small Screen Actors Guild pension, he's actually worth $21.6 million, and at the end was earning $500,000 a year. Most of his fortune, $18.6 million, is in real estate assets. His Mulholland Drive home is valued at $10 million, and it's assumed his Tahitian atoll makes up the remaining $8.6 million. The remaining estate is made up of private property, sketches, paintings, and film scripts to the tune of $3 million, and is to be transferred to a trust. In his will, he specifies monthly payments to 2 female friends and 8 of his 10 living children, ranging in age from 10 to 46 as beneficiaries.
And what's interesting is he chose to disinherit 2 of the potential beneficiaries under his estate, his daughter Petra and his grandson Tuki.
He also threatens to cut off any heir who challenges the distribution of his assets.
Brando did use something in his will called a no contest clause, which means if any beneficiary tries to contest his wishes, they would be disinherited and wouldn't receive a penny. And that works great for beneficiaries who actually receive money under the will. But for the two that he disinherited, Petra and Tukey, it really doesn't do any good. They would lose nothing by contesting his will since they didn't receive anything under the will. They could have contested it saying he was unduly influenced, that there was a forgery involved, or maybe, given his health and mental state, he was even incompetent.
Weeks before he died, Brando replaced his 2 long-term friends with 3 new executors. Film executive Mike Medavoy, Avra Douglas, a family friend, and Mike's brother-in-law, Larry Dressler, an accountant whom Brando never met. Brando's previous 2 executors, Alice Marchak and Joanne Corrales, are not happy when they learn they're out of the will. Both sue Brando's estate. But Corrales isn't just after the executor position.
In the end, Mr. Brando's estate needed new blood, and a former estate manager, Ms. Corrales, was forced out. She counterclaimed by suing for sexual harassment, claiming that, among other things, he had touched her breast, frankly, and made unwarranted comments and made her feel uncomfortable. Some people question whether that case could be tried given Brando's death. How is a dead man going to get a fair trial? So Brando wouldn't be able to defend himself. Ms. Corrales would be able to tell a jury anything she likes. And then the lawyer for the Brando estate would have to say, hey, it's easy to malign a dead man. And I suspect the litigation would not have gone very far.
She demands $3 million, plus 10% of the residuals Brando received while he was her boss. Eventually, Corrales and Marchak win a piece of the Brando pie, but the estate never lets on how much. After losing money on lawsuits, Brando's estate decides to sell his Mulholland Drive home. His next-door neighbor, Jack Nicholson, buys the property for $5 million, half the previously valued price. Brando's estate follows with the sale of the century, auctioning off the star's most valued possessions.
Godfather memorabilia are the most sought-after items in the auction. In 6.5 hours, 500 different people come to the auction or bid by phone, generating lots of interest and even more money.
The sale includes a transcript of a telegram Brando sent Marilyn Monroe after her nervous breakdown, which goes for $36,000. A set of bongos fetches $11,000, and Brando's beloved photo of him and Rita Moreno that hung in his study is bought for $48,000.
But the highest bid was for his annotated script from The Godfather. That script alone fetched well over $300,000. I mean, we haven't seen a script like that go up for auction at a high price since Clark Gable's script from Gone with the Wind.
In total, the Brando estate makes $2,378,300. Not bad for 6.5 hours' work. Now swimming in money, Brando's estate gives $200,000 of the proceeds to his son Christian. Sadly, Christian spends the money on drinking and his other addictions. The estate then sells off a piece of his private island sanctuary. For a 99-year lease of his Tahitian atoll, they rake in $2 million. Developer Richard Bailey has big plans for a luxury resort. Property sales make 2005 a bumper year for Brando's estate, with approximately $9 million rolling in. But with his estate settled, 2-time Oscar winner Marlon Brando's fame and fortune is far from over. Actor, activist, and icon Marlon Brando is dead, but his career is far from over. In 2006, 2 years after his death, Brando lights up the silver screen again as old footage is featured in Superman Returns. That same year, the Godfather video game Brando worked on in 2004 is released and grosses $41 million.
Who would have thought gamers who weren't even born when The Godfather came out in 1972 would be interested in playing a digital Don Corleone?
But as in Brando's life, in death, every success is paired with an equal dose of tragedy. 4 years after Brando dies, in 2008, his eldest son Christian passes away, and Christian's ex-wife Deborah fights for the beneficiary rights. She suspects Marlon Brando was suffering from dementia in the weeks before his death, and that the changes to his will were forged. She decides to sue.
Wills can be amended at any time, and there's a highfalutin legal term for that. It's called a codicil. So the codicil to a will is an amendment. Questions have arisen about whether Brando was demented at the time he signed one of the codicils. That would have to be tested in an evidentiary hearing, and among the evidence that would be offered to prove this would be any medical records that existed, and then to a degree, the testimony of his loved ones or people close to him. But the testimony of his loved ones or people close to him would be inherently suspect because these are people who stand in line to benefit from the will, presumably. So the issue is a live one. I don't know whether he was demented. I don't know whether he had testamentary capacity to sign the will or not. That's something the court would have to determine, and it would be a probate court that would determine that.
Lawyers for the executors deny the forgery. They claim Brando changed executors because business manager Corrales was no longer working for him, and assistant Marchak was too old to cope with complex legal issues. Regardless, the California Court of Appeal throws out the case. The estate pays Deborah not to bother them again with an undisclosed nuisance settlement. Marlon Brando starred in more than 40 movies, leaving an indelible print on the motion picture industry and a profound influence on American culture, leading many to feel his estate should be bringing in money hand over fist.
Marlon Brando is an American icon, yet for some reason his estate hasn't been able to capitalize on the money-making potential of his brand and his image like other well-known American icons. So we're gonna have to stay tuned to see if his estate can start to bring in money because the income for the estate has dropped.
One thing that we know in the Brando estate is that there have been lots and lots of lawsuits, and many of these lawsuits could have been avoided with better estate planning.
In 2009, the executors of his estate established Brando Enterprises. They licensed the late actor's name and image to a variety of brands, including the Renault Clio and Lujo jeans. And they're not the only ones trying to make a buck off Brando.
There were multiple companies that tried to sell products under Brando's name, which prompted the estate to sue these various companies. It's quite common that celebrities have this problem, especially when they pass away, and their estates are led into lawsuits like this. But for some reason with Brando's estate, there seem to be really odd examples of these lawsuits.
One of the biggest offenders is Madonna. She's been using Brando's image in concert for years, whenever she performs her hit, Vogue. She also has been paying $5,000 for the privilege. But in 2012, Brando's estate thinks it's not enough. They claim Madonna exploited Brando in nearly 90 concerts and seek up to $1 million for each use of his image. On top of this, they demand $20,000 for every future use. After a year of battling, the parties settle the suit. In 2014, luxury hotel The Brando opens on his Tahitian atoll. Only accessible by private plane, each of the 35 villas features a plunge pool and private beach area.
A resort did make the Brando estate an offer that they couldn't refuse. The Brando estate signed a lease with a resort in Tahiti, and they're going to be charging fees up to $12,000 a night to stay at this resort.
Would the intensely private Marlon Brando really want a whole gaggle of hot, sweaty, sunburned tourists to show up on his island retreat? I don't think so, but then again, I'm not getting a cut of those profits.
Madame Tussauds goes on to honor Brando with not one, but two wax figures. One of him from The Wild One, and another from The Godfather.
When Madame Tussauds makes not one, but two wax figures of you, you know you've really hit the sweet spot of success. Brando's talent was a force majeure. It was an act of God. But talent aside, the guy is one of the greatest real-life rebels who ever walked the earth. And for that, I applaud him.